Welcome to sinister serials, where shadows whisper and every tale chills to the bone. Join us on Macabre Monday for gothic tales shrouded in mist and mystery. Beneath the cloak of night, where shadows whisper secrets of old, lies a tale of curses woven through generations untold. Within these hallowed halls, the McAllister lineage battles a darkness that clings to their very souls. Bound by blood and burdened with breaking the unbreakable, they confront their fate at the stroke of the witching hour. Join us if you dare for Macabre Monday, where each story unfolds a tapestry of terror and tantalizing tales.
As the last echoes of Lily's screams faded into the depths of the manor, a heavy, oppressive silence descended upon the great hall. The air hung thick and oppressive, laced with the acrid scent of fear and the whispers of unseen entities. The once comforting crackle of the fireplace now resembled the sinister hissing of spectral voices, mocking their despair with cruel, disembodied laughter. Robert McAllister stood at the head of the table, his weathered hands gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The flickering light of the fire cast long shadows across Robert's face, deepening the lines of exhaustion and worry that had become a permanent fixture in recent days. His gaze roamed over his family, taking in the haunted expressions and trembling forms of his wife and children. The sight tore at his heart, and a wave of helplessness threatened to engulf him. In the suffocating stillness, Robert's mind raced with a torrent of doubts and fears. The weight of his family's legacy pressed down upon him, a burden he had never asked to bear but could not escape. He questioned his ability to protect them, to lead them through the darkness that had engulfed their lives. The shadows that slithered along the walls seemed to taunt his inadequacy, their serpentine forms contorting in an unholy dance, untethered from the firelight's feeble glow. Malevolent shapes flickered in the periphery, vanishing as soon as his gaze fixed upon them, as if the darkness itself were a sentient force toying with his sanity. Robert drew in a shuddering breath, the musty scent of decay and aged misery assaulting his nostrils, as if the very walls were saturated with the anguish of countless souls who had suffered within these grim confines. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering the tattered remnants of his courage. The memories of his own father flooded his mind, tales of resilience and strength in the face of unimaginable adversity. In that moment, Robert knew what he had to do. With a voice that trembled slightly, Robert began to speak.
I remember when my father stood in this very hall, facing his own battles.
His words were quiet, but they seemed to echo through the room with a power that defied their volume.
He told me a story, one that has stayed with me all these years.
As Robert recounted the tale of his father's triumphs and tribulations, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The shadows stilled, as if even they were drawn in by the power of his words. Margaret and Lily leaned forward, their eyes glistening with a flicker of hope amidst the tears. Robert's voice grew steadier as he spoke, his words painting a vivid picture of the resilience and courage that had defined their family for generations. He described the sacrifices his father had made, the battles he had fought, and the unwavering love he had for his family. Through the power of his story, Robert sought to instill a sense of unity and purpose in his own children, to remind them of the strength that flowed through their veins. As he neared the end of his tale, Robert's gaze locked with Lily's. In her eyes, he saw a glimmer of the determination and bravery that had always set her apart.
We are stronger together,
he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction.
We've come this far, and we will go further. Our love, our bond as a family, is the one thing that the darkness cannot touch.
Lily's lips curved into a small smile, and she nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her father's words. Margaret reached for Robert's hand, her touch a reassuring presence that seemed to chase away the chill of the shadows. In that moment, Robert felt a flicker of hope reignite within his chest. The road ahead was treacherous, the dangers unimaginable, but he knew that they would face them together. As a family, united in love and purpose, they would stand against the darkness and fight for the light. The fire crackled and popped, casting a warm glow across the faces of the McAllisters. Robert stood silently, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. In their ever-shifting light, he could almost see the echoes of the battles to come, the confrontations that would test their resolve and their love. But he also saw the promise of a brighter future, a world where the shadows held no sway and the curse that had haunted their family for generations was nothing more than a distant memory. With a quiet sigh, Robert turned back to his family, his eyes filled with a newfound determination. They had a long night ahead of them, a final gathering before the storm that loomed on the horizon. But for now, in this moment of quiet reflection and shared strength, they would find solace in each other's presence and the unbreakable bonds that held them together, a brief respite from the malevolent forces that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. As the echo of Robert's words dissipated, Margaret felt an icy chill slither down her spine, the burden of her own fears coalescing into a suffocating weight that pressed upon her chest. The great hall seemed to contract around her, the once comforting crackle of the flames twisting into a mocking hiss, as if the very walls were whispering of the doom that lay ahead. She turned her gaze upon Lily, her heart constricting with anguish at the sight of her daughter's ashen complexion and hollow, haunted eyes. In the flickering light of the flames, Lily's face was etched with the vestiges of a silent torment, the shadows beneath her eyes seeming to shift and writhe like malevolent entities feasting upon her very soul. It was a burden that no child should have to bear, a weight that threatened to crush the very life from her beloved daughter's spirit. Margaret's gaze drifted to the silver locket that hung around her neck, the metal warm against her skin. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of McAllister women, a symbol of the strength and resilience that had seen them through countless trials. But now, as she looked upon the delicate engravings that adorned its surface, Margaret felt a sense of helplessness wash over her. How could she shield her beloved daughter from the insidious curse that had plagued their bloodline for generations, its tendrils of darkness sinking ever deeper into their souls with each passing year? How could she spare Lily from the unspeakable sacrifices that the ritual would demand, the unholy bargains that must be struck with malign forces to secure their salvation, if such a thing were even possible? With a shaky breath, Margaret rose to her feet, her hands trembling as she smoothed the folds of her gown.
"I've been hiding something from you all,"
she said, her voice little more than a whisper.
"Something that terrifies me."
The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the pounding of Margaret's own heart. She could feel the weight of her family's gazes upon her, the unspoken questions that hung in the air between them.
"I fear for Lily,"
Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger with each word.
"I fear for what this curse will demand of her, for the sacrifices that she may be called upon to make."
Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears.
Mother!
She breathed, her voice trembling.
What do you mean?
Margaret reached for the locket, her fingers curling around the delicate metal. With a gentle tug, she lifted it from her neck, the silver chain glinting in the firelight.
"This locket,"
she said, holding it out for all to see,
"is more than just a family heirloom. It is a token of protection, a symbol of the love and strength that has been passed down through generations of McAllister women."
She pressed the locket into Lily's hand, her own fingers lingering for a moment on her daughter's warm skin.
"I give this to you now, my darling girl, in the hopes that it will shield you from the darkness that threatens to consume us all.
Lily stared down at the locket, her fingers tracing the intricate engravings that adorned its surface.
But what if it's not enough?
She whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the flames.
What if the curse demands more than just a token of protection?
Margaret's heart clenched at the fear that laced her daughter's words. She reached out, gathering Lily into her arms and holding her close.
We will face whatever comes together,
She murmured, her voice fierce with determination.
as a family, united in love and purpose.
Robert and Elias exchanged a glance, their expressions grim.
The ritual will demand a sacrifice.
Elias said, his voice heavy with the weight of his knowledge.
A life given willingly to balance the scales and break the curse.
Margaret's breath caught in her throat, her arms tightening instinctively around Lily. The thought of losing her daughter, of sacrificing her to the darkness that had haunted their family for so long, was a pain too great to bear. Yet even as the fear threatened to overwhelm her, Margaret knew that they had no choice. The curse had to be broken, the darkness vanquished, if they were to have any hope of a future free from its insidious grasp.
Then we will face that sacrifice together.
She said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't quite feel.
We will stand united as a family, and we will find a way to break this curse once and for all.
As the words left her lips, Margaret felt a flicker of hope ignite within her heart. It was a fragile thing, a tiny spark amidst the overwhelming darkness, but it was enough to chase away the chill of despair that had settled over her bones. They would face the ritual together, as a family. They would stand strong in the face of the sacrifices that would be demanded of them, and they would emerge victorious, their love and unity a beacon of light in the darkness. As the conversation turned to the details of the ritual, the strategic planning that would be required to ensure their success, Margaret held Lily close, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she also knew that they would face it together as a family, united in their determination to break the curse and claim the future that had been so long denied them, no matter the unholy price they might be forced to pay. As the hushed whispers detailing the ritual's grim rites faded into an oppressive silence, an icy weight of dread settled upon Lily's shoulders, pressing down with the force of a spectral hand. The ancient parchment lay spread before them, its faded ink and intricate diagrams a testament to the dark magic that had ensnared their family for generations. Elias's grave words echoed through the darkened recesses of her mind, a morbid reminder of the grisly sacrifices that would be demanded of them all, a bloody toll exacted by the insatiable forces of darkness they dared defy. Lily's gaze roamed over the faces of her family, taking in the mix of fear and determination that etched their features. In the sputtering, sickly light of the candle's feeble flames, their twisted shadows danced and contorted upon the walls in a grotesque, macabre pantomime, as if the very spirits of darkness had seized their silhouettes to mirror the treacherous, serpentine paths of their inescapable fate. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and Lily felt a chill race down her spine, icy tendrils of dread caressing her flesh like the touch of a vengeful specter. The darkness beyond the glass seemed to press inward, a living, breathing entity that hungered for their souls with an insatiable, gnawing appetite. She swallowed hard, her mouth dry with the taste of fear and anticipation, the twin harbingers of the horrors to come.
Each of you has a crucial role.
Elias said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a rusted blade.
We must be precise, for any misstep could be fatal, inviting oblivion to swallow us whole.
Lily's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to drown out all other sounds, the macabre rhythm of their impending doom. The enormity of the task before them was staggering, a burden that threatened to crush her beneath its immense, suffocating weight. How could she, a mere girl, shoulder the responsibility of leading her family through the darkness and into the light, of guiding them through the yawning abyss that had swallowed so many before. But even as the doubts clawed at her mind like the talons of some feral beast, Lily felt a flicker of determination ignite within her heart, a defiant spark that refused to be snuffed by the encroaching gloom. She had come too far, had seen too much, to falter now. Her family needed her, and she would not let them down, would not abandon them to the ravenous maw of the darkness that sought to devour them all. With a deep breath that seemed to fill her lungs with the very essence of their ancestral resolve, Lily rose to her feet, her chin lifted in a gesture of defiance against the malign forces that conspired to break her.
We've come too far to fail now,
she said, her voice ringing with a strength that belied the terror coursing through her veins.
We do this together, no matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices demanded of our flesh and souls.
Her words hung in the air, a promise and a challenge all in one, a solemn vow that reverberated through the shadows as if stirring the restless spirits that lurked there. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire, the pop and hiss of the flames, a chilling mirror of the dark forces that sought to consume them, to reduce their existence to naught but smoldering ash upon the pyre of fate. But then, slowly, her family began to nod, their eyes bright with a renewed sense of purpose that cut through the gloom like blades of defiant hope. Robert reached out, his hand clasping Lily's shoulder in a gesture of support, his calloused palm a reminder of the trials they had already endured.
"We trust you, Lily,"
he said, his voice rough with emotion, yet fortified by an unbreakable resolve.
"Lead us and we will follow, come what may."
Lily felt a surge of love and gratitude wash over her, a warmth that chased away the chill of fear that had settled in her bones like a malignant frost. She looked to each member of her family in turn, her gaze lingering on their faces as if to burn their images into her memory, to forge an unbreakable bond that would see them through the horrors that awaited.
The ritual will take place at midnight,
Elias said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, a portentous knell heralding their darkest hour.
We must be ready, in body and in spirit, to face the darkness and claim our victory. To falter is to surrender our souls to oblivion's ravenous maw.
Lily nodded, her jaw set with determination as unyielding as granite, her eyes burning with a fierce, defiant light that threatened to scorch away the shadows.
We will be ready,
she said, her voice a solemn vow that reverberated through the stillness like a battle cry.
We will stand together, as a family, and we will break this curse, once and for all. Our defiance shall be an inferno that incinerates the darkness, a blinding beacon that will guide us through the abyss and into the light.
As the words left her lips, Lily felt a sense of calm settle over her, a quiet certainty that they were on the right path, the only path that could lead them to salvation or damnation eternal. The road ahead would be fraught with danger and sacrifice, a gauntlet of horrors that would test the mettle of their very souls. But they would face it together, united in their love and their determination to prevail against the malign forces that had plagued their bloodline for far too long. The candles flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows upon the walls that seemed to twist and contort like the vengeful spirits of those who had fallen before them, the brave and battered souls who had fought and suffered beneath the weight of the curse. In their shifting light, Lily could almost see the echoes of the generations that had come before them, a solemn procession of the doomed marching inexorably toward their fate. But as she looked to her family, to the fierce and unyielding love that shone in their eyes like a beacon scattering the shadows, Lily knew that they would not be like those who had come before. They would not falter, would not succumb to the darkness that sought to claim them as its latest prizes. No, they were the McAllisters, and they would stand together, shoulder to shoulder, an unbreakable bulwark against the tides of oblivion. No matter the cost, they would endure, and they would be victorious. As the night deepened and the hour of the ritual drew near, the family made their final preparations. Weapons were sharpened, their blades honed to wicked edges that gleamed with a sinister, bloody promise. Ancient tomes were consulted, their dusty pages whispering secrets that had driven lesser souls to madness. Whispered prayers were offered up to whatever gods might still listen, desperate entreaties for salvation from the abyss that yawned ever wider before them. Lily stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding with a fierce, wild hope that burned like a pyre in the depths of her soul. She knew that the battle ahead would be the greatest test of their lives, a crucible that would forge them anew or break them beyond repair, leaving their shattered remnants to be consumed by the ravenous darkness they had dared defy. But even as the fear and uncertainty clawed at her heart like the talons of some monstrous beast, Lily felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. This was their destiny, the culmination of generations of struggle and sacrifice, and they would meet it head-on, with every fiber of their beings dedicated to victory. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the stillness of the manor like a tolling bell, a solemn knell that reverberated through the very stones, as if rousing the restless spirits that dwelled within. As the final note faded into silence, a hush more oppressive than any scream, Lily turned to face her family, her eyes bright with a fierce, unyielding determination that burned like twin suns scattering the shadows.
It's time,
She said, her voice ringing with the strength of generations past, a clarion call that seemed to summon the very spirits of their ancestors to lend their ethereal weight to the battle ahead.
Let us go forth and claim our victory, in the name of all those who have come before, and all those who will come after. Our defiance shall be a blazing pyre that incinerates the darkness, an inferno that will scour the curse from our bloodline forevermore.
And with those words, the McAllisters stepped forward, their hearts united in a single, unbreakable purpose, a solidarity forged in the fires of their ancestral struggles. The darkness waited, its hunger a palpable thing that seemed to swallow the very air around them, a miasma of dread that sought to smother their defiant flames. But they would not falter, would not turn back. They were the McAllisters, the latest sentinels in an eternal vigil against the forces of darkness that had plagued their family for far too long. And on this night, they would stand together, an unbreakable bulwark against the tides of oblivion, and they would be victorious, no matter the cost. Their defiance would be an inferno that would scour the curse from their bloodline forever, a blinding beacon that would guide them through the abyss and into the light. The decrepit altar room of McAllister Manor pulsed with a malevolent energy, its very walls seeming to quiver with anticipation as the family gathered to initiate the final, fateful ritual. The air hung heavy, thick with the weight of centuries and the cloying scent of decay. In the guttering light of the candles, eerie shadows danced upon the stone walls, their movements erratic and unsettling, as if guided by an unseen hand. Lily stood at the epicenter of the unholy design, her heart thrashing against her ribcage as she took in the eldritch symbols gouged into the ancient stone, their meanings both enticing and terrifying in equal measure. Her mother, Margaret, clutched the ancient tome to her chest, her knuckles bone-white with the force of her grip, as if the book itself might spring to life and tear her asunder. Robert, his jaw clenched and his eyes haunted, took his place at the edge of the circle, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. Lily drew in a shuddering breath, the musty, fetid air filling her lungs like a noxious poison. The chill in the room seemed to seep into her very marrow, a physical manifestation of the malevolent presence that lurked just beyond the veil, watching, waiting, its hunger palpable in the oppressive stillness. But she would not falter, even as the icy tendrils of fear wrapped themselves around her heart. They were so close to breaking the curse, to banishing the darkness that had haunted their family for generations, feeding on their misery and despair. With a nod to her mother, Lily began to recite the ancient words of the ritual, her voice low and steady, even as it trembled with barely contained terror. As the incantation fell from her lips, the candles sputtered and died, their meager light swallowed whole by the ravenous darkness. A low, pulsating hum filled the air, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very bowels of the earth, setting their teeth on edge and sending shivers down their spines. Lily's heart raced, a trapped bird fluttering desperately against the cage of her ribs, but she pushed on, her words growing louder and more insistent, a desperate plea against the impending doom. And then, the whispers began, a chorus of spectral voices that filled the chamber with their eerie, discordant song. Lily felt a soul-shattering shiver run down her spine, a primal, instinctual fear that threatened to overwhelm her senses, to drag her down into the depths of madness. But she would not be cowed, not now, not ever. With a fierce determination born of desperation, she raised her voice above the ghostly cacophony, her words ringing out like a clarion call, a challenge to the darkness that sought to consume them all. The symbols on the floor began to glow, a sickly, pulsating green light that seeped from the cracks and pores of the stone, creating a ghastly, eldritch design that writhed and pulsed in time with the rhythm of her chant. And then, the entities clawed their way into existence, their spectral forms oozing from the shadows like pus from an infected wound. They writhed and contorted in the sputtering candlelight, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if guided by a puppet master's cruel hand. Some were little more than wisps of smoke, the tattered remnants of anguished souls. But others were twisted abominations, things of pure nightmare that defied comprehension, their very forms an assault on the mind and sanity. As the hellish creatures circled the altar like a pack of rabid beasts, Lily's family moved to flank her, their weapons glinting in the unholy green glow. The air crackled with a malefic energy, so cold it burned, and each breath was like inhaling shards of ice. Even as Lily's teeth chattered and her limbs grew numb, she continued on, the ritual consuming her from within, the ancient words searing her tongue like acid. But even as the ritual neared its crescendo, a new terror emerged from the depths of the stone, a figure hewn from the very fabric of shadow. It loomed above them, a colossus of pure malevolence, its eyes simmering with a hatred so intense it seemed to scorch the very air. Lily felt herself shrink beneath the weight of its gaze, her courage faltering in the face of such unbridled evil.
Foolish child,
the entity whispered, its voice like the rasp of a blade against bone.
You dance upon the edge of oblivion, toying with forces beyond your ken. You cannot hope to break the curse, to unravel the skein of fate that binds your wretched bloodline.
Lily opened her mouth to retort, to deny the insidious words that wormed their way into her mind, but doubt blossomed like a black rose in her heart. Could she truly defy the curse, break the chains that had bound her family for generations? Or was she merely a puppet, dancing to the tune of a cruel and uncaring universe? As if sensing her hesitation, the entity pressed its advantage, its form unfurling like a cancerous blossom.
Embrace your fate, little one.
It crooned, its voice a seductive poison.
Submit to the darkness, and I shall grant you power beyond your wildest dreams. Resist and suffer the consequences of your folly.
For a moment that stretched into eternity, Lily wavered, the temptation of power, of freedom from the curse, singing a siren song in her blood. But then she looked to her family, to the faces of those who loved her, who had fought beside her, and she knew that she could never betray them, no matter the cost. With a scream of defiance that tore itself from her throat, Lily raised her hands, the final words of the ritual exploding from her lips in a torrent of syllables that burned like hellfire. The entity recoiled as if struck, its form writhing and contorting in anguish, but still it came on, its blackened claws grasping hungrily for her heart. But Lily would not falter, not now, not ever. She poured every ounce of her love, her determination, her very essence into the ritual, the power of her sacrifice a blinding light against the darkness. The symbols on the floor flared with an incandescent brilliance, a purifying flame that seared the shadows from the room, driving the entities back into the abyss from whence they came. And as the light consumed her, burning away the impurities of her mortal flesh and bone, Lily felt a sense of peace wash over her, a quiet acceptance of her fate. She had given everything, had sacrificed all that she was and all that she could ever be, to save those she loved. In that moment, as the darkness receded and the curse was lifted at last, Lily knew that it had been worth it. For in the end, there was no greater power than the love that bound them, the unbreakable ties of family and sacrifice. And so, with a final, beatific smile upon her lips, Lily McAllister embraced the light, a shining beacon against the night, forevermore. The air in the altar room crackled with a sinister, malevolent energy that seemed to seep into the very marrow of Robert's bones. The entity loomed over Lily like a towering monolith of darkness, its form pulsing with an otherworldly power that sent icy tendrils of dread slithering down Robert's spine. He could see the grim determination etched upon his daughter's face, the set of her jaw as unyielding as the ancient stones that surrounded them. But beneath that bravery, he could sense the primal fear that coiled in her gut, the flicker of doubt that threatened to extinguish the feeble light of hope that had brought them to this accursed place. Robert's white-knuckled grip tightened on the hilt of his sword, the cold metal slick with the clammy sweat of his palm and the congealing blood of the spectral abominations that had assailed them. His heart pounded in his chest, a relentless, thunderous drumbeat that echoed the desperate urgency of their plight. They teetered on the brink of a yawning abyss, the curse that had plagued the McAllisters for generations, threatening to drag them down into its fathomless depths. But the price of their freedom, it seemed, would be paid in blood and unimaginable sacrifice. As the entity bore down upon Lily, its form shimmering and shifting like a miasma of living shadow, Robert felt a surge of primal protectiveness well up within him, as dark and fierce as the raging tempest that howled beyond the crumbling walls of the keep. This was his child, his flesh and blood, the last flickering ember of light in a world consumed by darkness. He would not let this twisted creature of the abyss snuff out her life, not while the breath still rasped in his lungs and the fire of defiance burned in his heart. With a roar of fury that shook the very foundations of the altar room, Robert leapt forward, his blade flashing in the eldritch light like a shard of bitter ice. The entity turned to face him, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence that seared his mind and set his teeth on edge. But Robert did not falter, did not allow the mind-numbing terror that coiled in his gut to stay his hand. He struck at the entity with all the strength he could muster, his sword cleaving through the cloying darkness of its form like a holy blade through the flesh of the damned. The creature let out a piercing shriek of agony and rage, a sound that knifed through Robert's skull and sent him staggering back, his vision swimming with pulsing red shadows. But still, he pressed on, his blade a whirling dervish of silver death, as he hacked and slashed at the abomination with a savage ferocity born of soul-deep desperation. Behind him, the discordant chanting of his wife and daughter rose and fell in an ancient, guttural cadence that pulsed with an unsettling power, the eldritch words seeming to claw at the very fabric of reality. The air grew thick and heavy with the cloying stench of incense and blood, the vile miasma filling Robert's nostrils and searing his lungs with every labored breath. But he did not relent, did not allow himself to be swayed from his grim purpose by the creeping madness that threatened to engulf his mind. The entity fought back with a terrifying savagery, its form shifting and flowing like quicksilver as it sought to evade Robert's flashing blade. It lashed out with writhing tendrils of living shadow, their icy caress numbing his flesh and sapping the strength from his limbs. Robert gritted his teeth against the searing agony, his muscles screaming in protest as he strained to keep the nightmarish creature at bay. But even as he fought with every last shred of his failing strength, Robert could feel the toll that the battle was taking on his battered body and weakening mind. The entity seemed to sense his growing frailty, its attacks growing more vicious and precise, seeking out the chinks in his armor with a cold, calculating malevolence. And then, with a burst of preternatural speed that defied mortal comprehension, the entity slipped past Robert's faltering guard, its form coalescing into a writhing mass of shadow and malice. It lunged towards Lily, its razor-sharp talons outstretched, its gaping maw bristling with jagged, needle-like teeth that dripped with a viscous, tar-like ichor. Robert's heart seized in his chest, a strangled cry of horror and despair tearing from his raw, bleeding throat as he watched his daughter reel back, her eyes wide with soul-rending terror. He threw himself forward in a last, desperate attempt to save her, his blade flashing in a wild, hopeless arc as he sought to intercept the creature's savage onslaught. But he was too slow, his reflexes dulled by exhaustion and the insidious whispers of the entity that clawed at the edges of his mind. The creature's razor-sharp talons tore through Lily's tunic like a hot knife through butter, raking across her chest and leaving gaping, ragged wounds that wept crimson blood, the droplets glistening like macabre rubies in the guttering candlelight. Lily screamed, a sound of such raw, primal agony that it seemed to pierce the very heavens and echo through the benighted halls of the keep. Robert staggered to his daughter's side, his sword falling from his nerveless fingers as he gathered her broken, bleeding form into his arms. Margaret was there in an instant, her face a mask of ashen horror, her eyes haunted by a despair that mirrored the yawning abyss that threatened to swallow Robert's soul. Together, they cradled Lily's shuddering body, their hands slick with her life's blood as they fought to staunch the crimson tide that poured from her grievous wounds. But even as they struggled to save their daughter's life, Robert could feel the suffocating weight of the entity's malevolent presence, the way the very air seemed to thrum with its vile, discordant power. It hovered at the edge of the altar like a looming specter of death, its form shifting and writhing like a nest of shadowy serpents, its eyes glittering with a cruel, mocking malevolence.
You cannot hope to prevail.
It hissed, its voice a sibilant whisper that coiled around Robert's mind like a noose of icy shadow.
The curse that binds your wretched bloodline is woven into the very fabric of your souls, an indelible stain that can never be cleansed. You are but puppets dancing on the strings of an ancient, inexorable fate, doomed to play out the same tragic farce for all eternity.
Robert's heart clenched, a flicker of doubt sparking to life in the yawning void of his despair. What if the entity spoke the truth? What if they were but fools tilting at windmills, throwing themselves against the pitiless gears of a vast, uncaring cosmos that held nothing but suffering and damnation in store for them? But then he looked down at Lily, at the faint, flickering light of determination that still glimmered in her pain-glazed eyes, and he knew that he could not surrender, could not let this vile creature of the abyss claim victory over their souls. With a trembling hand, He brushed a matted lock of blood-soaked hair from Lily's sweat-drenched brow, his touch gentle and filled with a fierce, undying love.
We will never yield!
He rasped, his voice raw and choked with emotion, yet ringing with an unshakable resolve.
We are McAllisters, and we will fight to our last breath to break the chains of this accursed fate and seize our freedom from the jaws of damnation itself.
Lily's cracked, bloodied lips curved into a faint, pain-filled smile, her hand finding Robert's and squeezing with a strength that seemed to flow from the very depths of her indomitable spirit.
Together,
she whispered, her voice a thready rasp that cut through the cloying miasma of despair like a blade of purest light. Robert nodded, his heart swelling with a fierce, unbreakable love for his family that burned brighter than the eldritch fires of the abyss itself.
Together,
he echoed, his gaze sweeping over Margaret and Elias, who stood beside them, their faces etched with the same grim, unyielding resolve. As one, they turned to face the looming specter of the entity, their eyes blazing with a defiant fire that no darkness could hope to quench. The creature let out a snarl of rage and frustration, its form rippling and pulsing with barely contained malevolence.
Then you shall all perish together.
It hissed, its voice dripping with venomous hatred.
And your souls shall be mine to torment for all eternity, playthings to dance upon the strings of my dark desires.
With those chilling words, the entity launched itself forward in a roiling tide of shadow and malice, its form expanding and contorting into a nightmarish shape that defied the very laws of nature itself. Robert braced himself for the impact, his heart pounding with a sickening amalgam of terror and grim determination. But even as the creature bore down upon them like a crashing wave of liquid darkness, he knew that they would not falter, would not let this moment of abject horror define the legacy of the McAllisters. They were bound by ties of blood and love, united in their unwavering resolve to shatter the accursed chains of fate that had shackled them for so long. No matter the cost, no matter the depths of suffering and sacrifice they would be forced to endure, they would see this grim quest through to its bitter end. For in the face of such unyielding darkness, the only light that remained was the fierce, undying love they held for one another, a love that would guide them through the very gates of hell itself and out into the dawning light of a new and glorious day. As the malevolent entity loomed over her like a suffocating shadow, Lily felt the crushing weight of an ancient, inescapable doom pressing down upon her very soul. Yet, amidst the overwhelming despair, a flicker of defiant determination struggled to life within her, like a feeble candle flame in a tempest of darkness. The air around her crackled with an unholy energy, a palpable malevolence that seemed to seep from the very stones of the altar room. The ancient masonry thrummed with a dark power that resonated through Lily's bones, setting her teeth on edge and sending icy tendrils of fear slithering down her spine. Her family stood beside her, their faces etched with a haunting mixture of terror and grim resolve, their weapons at the ready as they prepared to make their final, desperate stand against the encroaching darkness. But Lily knew, with a bone-deep certainty that was both terrifying and strangely comforting, that this battle was hers to fight alone. The ritual had begun, the ancient words of power spilling from her lips like a rushing river of dark incantations, and she could feel the curse that had haunted her family for generations beginning to unravel like a tapestry of twisted shadows. But the entity that stood before her, its form pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to devour the very light around it, would not relinquish its hold so easily.
You cannot hope to prevail, foolish child.
The entity hissed, its voice a venomous whisper that slithered into Lily's ears and coiled around her heart like a serpent of pure dread.
The curse that binds your family is an eternal, inescapable darkness, woven into the very fabric of your cursed lineage. You are not but a pawn, a plaything for forces beyond your feeble comprehension, in a game that has been played out across the centuries in a dance of unending despair.
Lily's heart raced, a sickening maelstrom of fear and defiance churning in her gut like a roiling tempest. She could feel the weight of the entity's gaze upon her, the way that it seemed to pierce through her very soul, laying bare all of her deepest doubts and most primal insecurities. But she refused to let it win, refused to let this creature of nightmare and shadow devour everything that she held dear in its insatiable hunger for darkness.
You're wrong,
she said, her voice ringing out with a strength that surprised even herself, a lone beacon of light in the suffocating gloom.
I am no pawn, and this is no game. This is my family, my legacy, and I will fight with every last shred of my being, every last drop of blood in my veins, to protect them from your vile plans.
The entity snarled, its form rippling and contorting with a rage that seemed to warp the very air around it. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, their icy touch sending jolts of searing agony racing through Lily's body like the cruel caress of 1,000 frozen needles. But she gritted her teeth and pushed through the mind-shattering pain, her hands moving in intricate patterns as she wove the threads of the ritual together like a tapestry of darkest magic. The very fabric of reality began to unravel around her, the boundaries between the mortal world and the nightmarish realm of the spirits blurring and distorting in a dizzying, mind-bending dance of shadows and darkness. The air shimmered with an unholy energy, warping and twisting like the surface of a fevered nightmare, as if the very laws of nature were being bent to the will of the ancient, malevolent forces that haunted this cursed place. Lily could feel the curse unraveling, the ancient magic that had bound her family for so long beginning to fray and snap like the strings of a twisted puppet. But the entity was not finished yet, its power still vast and terrible, its hunger for revenge as deep and insatiable as the yawning abyss of hell itself.
Lily!
Her mother cried out, her voice raw with a terror that seemed to cut through the very marrow of her bones.
Be careful, my love! Don't let it take you from us! Don't let it drag you down into the depths of its eternal darkness!
Lily's heart clenched, a wave of love and sorrow washing over her like a tide of bitter tears. She knew, with a clarity that was both painful and strangely peaceful, what she had to do. The ritual demanded a sacrifice, a willing offering of blood and spirit to seal the curse away forever, to banish the darkness back to the hellish abyss from whence it came. And she was ready to lay down her life for the sake of her family, for the chance to break the chain of suffering that had bound them in its cruel grip for so long.
I love you,
she whispered, her eyes filling with tears that glistened like diamonds in the unholy light of the altar room.
I love you all so much, more than life itself, more than the very breath in my lungs.
And then, with a final, defiant cry that echoed through the chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell, she plunged her hand into the swirling vortex of energy that surrounded the altar, her blood mingling with the ancient magic in a blinding flash of searing, soul-rending light. The entity screamed, its form shattering and dissolving like smoke on the wind, its power broken by Lily's sacrifice, by the strength of her love and the depth of her resolve. But even as the curse began to lift, even as the shadows that had haunted the McAllister family for generations began to recede like a tide of inky darkness, Lily could feel the life draining from her body like sand through an hourglass. She slumped to the ground, her vision blurring and dimming, her heartbeat slowing to a faint, fluttering rhythm that seemed to echo the fading pulse of the universe itself.
No!
Her father cried out, his voice raw with an anguish that seemed to tear at the very foundations of his soul as he gathered her into his arms like a fragile, broken doll.
Lily, stay with us. Please, don't leave us. Don't let the darkness take you from us.
But Lily could feel herself slipping away, her soul drawn inexorably towards the waiting arms of death, towards the endless, eternal void that yawned before her like a gaping maw of oblivion. She smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips, her hand reaching up to caress her father's cheek one last time. Her touch as light and fleeting as a ghost's whisper.
It's okay.
She breathed, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart, over the roaring silence of the encroaching darkness.
I did what I had to do. The curse is broken, and you are free, free from the chains of despair that have bound you for so long.
And then, with a final, shuddering breath that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the world, Lily closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, let it wrap her in its cold, eternal embrace. In the aftermath of the ritual, the McAllister family clung to each other like shipwrecked survivors, their grief and shock mingling with a fragile, tentative hope that flickered like a dying candle in the suffocating gloom. The curse was broken, the entity banished, but the price had been higher than any of them had ever dared to imagine, a price paid in blood and tears and the shattered remnants of their hearts. Margaret wept, her sobs echoing off the ancient stones of the altar room like the wails of a damned soul as she cradled Lily's still form in her arms, her tears falling like bitter rain upon her daughter's pale, lifeless face. Robert stood beside her, his face a mask of stoic grief, his eyes haunted by the knowledge of what his daughter had sacrificed for their sake, by the weight of the terrible choice that had been forced upon her. But even in the depths of their sorrow, there was a flicker of light, a sense that Lily's sacrifice had not been in vain, that her love and courage had bought them a chance at a future free from the curse's cruel grip. The shadows that had haunted the McAllister manor for so long had receded, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting like a veil of despair from their battered souls. And yet, as they emerged from the altar room, their hearts heavy with the weight of their loss and the burden of their guilt, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still not quite right, that some dark and twisted seed of evil still lurked within the very foundations of their home. The air around them felt charged with a strange, unsettling energy, a lingering sense of wrongness that whispered of unfinished business, of horrors yet to come. Elias, his face drawn and haggard, his eyes haunted by the shadows of 1,000 nightmares, looked to the horizon, his gaze distant and troubled.
"The curse is broken,"
he said, his voice low and solemn, heavy with the weight of the unspeakable knowledge that burned within his mind.
"But I fear that our troubles are far from over, that there are still secrets buried within these walls, still dangers lurking in the darkest corners of our lives."
Robert nodded, his jaw clenched with grim determination, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword like a man preparing for battle.
"Then we will face them,"
he said, his voice ringing with a resolve as hard and cold as the steel of his blade.
"For Lily's sake, for the sake of our family and the memory of all those who have suffered under this cursed legacy, we will not rest until every last trace of this evil is purged from our lives, until the very last shadow is banished from our souls."
As they made their way back to the manor, their steps heavy with the weight of their grief and their determination, the McAllisters knew that their journey was far from over, that the road ahead was still shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. The curse may have been broken, but the scars it had left upon their family, upon their very souls, would take far longer to heal, would perhaps never fully fade away. And in the darkest recesses of the shadows that still haunted the fringes of their reality, a malevolent presence stirred, its ancient, insatiable hunger for vengeance far from quelled. It lurked in the very cracks of their existence, a brooding, patient malice that watched and waited with the cold, implacable resolve of a predator stalking wounded prey, its appetite for their suffering and despair as vast and endless as the abyss itself. Lily's sacrifice had bought them a reprieve, a fleeting moment of peace in an eternity of darkness, but the battle was far from won. And the McAllisters knew that they would have to fight with every last ounce of their strength and their love if they hoped to emerge victorious in the end, if they hoped to banish the evil that had haunted them for so long. As they stepped over the threshold of the manor, the weight of the future pressing down upon their shoulders like a yoke of iron, Robert turned to his family, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering determination that burned like a beacon in the darkness.
For Lily,
he said, his voice ringing out like a clarion call in the stillness of the night, a solemn vow that seemed to echo through the very stones of the house.
for our family, for our future, for the chance to live a life free from the shadow of this ancient evil. We will not falter, and we will not fail, not while there is still breath in our bodies and hope in our hearts.
And with those words, the McAllisters prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, their hearts heavy with grief, but alight with the unquenchable fire of their love and their resolve, ready to fight to the bitter end for the chance to forge a brighter future from the ashes of their darkest nightmares.
Thank you for joining us on another spine-chilling journey, where nightmares come to life and horror knows no bounds. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're brave enough, step through the door and subscribe to Sinister Serials, where every day brings a new flavor of fear, from Macabre Mondays to Thriller Thursdays. And don't forget to check out our other terrifying tales, waiting to be discovered in our library of horror. Until next time, keep the lights on, if you dare.